Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I want to start with something very honest. I feel frustrated. I have been studying English for a long time. I understand many things. I can read, I can listen, I even know a lot of vocabulary. But when I speak, something feels wrong. People don't always understand me. Sometimes I repeat the same word again and again. Sometimes I feel embarrassed to speak. And the worst part is I'm not the only one. Many of my friends feel the same. We study English for years, but our pronunciation still sounds unnatural. So today I decided to do something different. I invited a teacher with more than 20 years of experience teaching English pronunciation to students from different countries. And today I want to ask him directly, why is pronunciation so difficult? And one and how can we really improve it? Thank you very much for being here, teacher. Thank you for your honesty. What you just described is something I hear almost every week from students. And I want to start by telling you something very important. Your problem is not rare, it's very common. Many students think they are bad at pronunciation, but in reality, they were never taught pronunciation in the right way. Most traditional methods focus on grammar, vocabulary, and reading, but pronunciation is often treated like a small detail. And that is a big mistake, because pronunciation is not just about sounds, it is about how your brain hears, processes, and produces language. That is interesting because I always thought pronunciation was just about repeating sounds correctly. That is exactly the problem. Many students believe pronunciation is about repeating words again and again. But let me explain something very important. You cannot pronounce what you cannot hear. This is one of the most important ideas in pronunciation training. If your ear cannot detect the difference between sounds, your mouth cannot produce them correctly. For example, many students confuse sounds like ship and sheep, bit and beat, lift and leaf. To them, these words sound almost the same. But for native speakers, they are completely different. So the first step is not speaking. The first step is training your ear. So the problem is not only in the mouth, it is also in the ear. Yes. And this is where many traditional methods fail. They tell the students, repeat after me, but they don't train the ear first. It is like asking someone to play music without teaching them how to hear the notes. Now, I want to introduce a modern technique that works very well. It is called focused listening. Instead of listening to English passively, you listen with a specific goal. For example, you choose one sound, let's say the I sound in ship. Then you listen to many examples of that sound in real speech. You pay attention only to that sound, not the whole sentence, not the grammar, only the sound. Over time, your brain starts to recognize the difference. And when your brain recognizes the difference, your pronunciation improves naturally. That sounds very different from what I usually do. I just listen to podcasts or videos without focusing on specific sounds. Yes, and that is another common mistake. Passive listening is good for general understanding, but for pronunciation, you need active and focused listening. Now, let me talk about another important idea. Many students try to pronounce English using the rules of their native language. This creates what we call sound interference. Your brain already has a system of sounds from your first language. When you speak English, your brain tries to use those same sounds. But English has different sound patterns. For example, the rhythm of English is very different from Spanish. English is a stress time language. That means some words are stressed, strong, and others are weak. For example, I want to go to the store. Not every word has the same importance. Some words are stronger, others are softer. If you pronounce every word with the same energy, your speech sounds unnatural. Yes, I think I do that. I pronounce every word clearly, but maybe too equally. Exactly. And that creates robotic speech. Natural English is like music. It has rhythm, stress, and variation. This is something many students never practice. Now, let me share something very important that many students don't expect. Good pronunciation is not about perfection, it is about clarity. Many students try to sound like native speakers. They want a perfect accent, but this is not necessary. What you need is to be clear and understandable. I have met students with strong accents but excellent pronunciation. Why? Because they pronounce sounds clearly and use natural rhythm. And I have met students with good accents but poor clarity. Why? Because they don't control stress, rhythm, and sound connection. That is very interesting. So, pronunciation is not about sounding native, but about being understood. Yes, that's correct. That should be your goal. Now, let me tell you about one of the biggest mistakes students make. They practice pronunciation with single words only. For example, water, better, teacher. They repeat these words many times. But when they speak in sentences, everything changes. Why? Because in real speech, words connect. For example, want to becomes wanna, going to becomes gonna, did you becomes didja. This is called connected speech, and it is key part of natural pronunciation. If you only practice isolated words, your pronunciation will not sound natural in real conversations. That explains why I understand words alone, but not when people speak fast. Yes, because native speakers don't speak word by word, they speak in sound groups. So if you want to improve your pronunciation, you must train your brain to hear and produce connected speech. Let me give you a simple example. Instead of practicing, I want to go to the store, practice it like this: I want to go to the store. And not only repeat it, but listen how it flows. Feel the rhythm. This is how real pronunciation improves. This is very different from what I learned before. Yes, because modern pronunciation training focuses more on real communication, not only on isolated sounds. Now, I want to talk about something very important: confidence. Many students have the ability to improve their pronunciation, but they don't practice speaking because they feel embarrassed. They think, my pronunciation is bad. People will judge me. I will make mistakes. So they stay silent. And this creates a problem because pronunciation improves through speaking, not only thinking. I had a student who was very shy. He understood English well, but he almost never spoke. One day, I asked him to record his voice for 2 minutes every day, not for perfection, just to practice. After 1 month, his pronunciation improved significantly, not because he studied more grammar, but because he started using his voice. That is inspiring because I think many of us are afraid to speak. Yes, and that fear slows progress. But pronunciation is a physical skill, like learning to play an instrument. You must practice regularly. This conversation is already changing how I see pronunciation. We talked about listening, sound recognition, rhythm, connected speech, and confidence. But I feel like there is still much more to explore. I want to ask you, what are the most effective daily practices students can use? What mistakes should they avoid? And how can someone sound more natural without spending years trying? That is exactly what we need to talk about next. Because improving pronunciation is not about talent, it is about using the right methods consistently. And when you understand those methods, everything becomes easier. I realized something very important. My problem is not only that I don't practice enough, but also that I have been practicing in the wrong way. I focus too much on repeating words and not enough on how English really sounds in real life. So now I want to go deeper. If someone wants to improve their pronunciation naturally, what should they actually do every day? Not theory, but real practice. That is the right question. And I'm glad you asked it in that way. Because pronunciation does not improve with random practice, it improves with intentional and structured habits that are repeated over time. And I want to give you a method that I have used with many students, something simple but very effective. The first practice is something I call shadow speaking, but don't correctly. Many students try shadowing, but they do it passively. They listen and repeat, but they don't pay attention to details. That does not create real improvement. Real shadow speaking means you listen to a short audio, maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and then you repeat it trying to copy not only the words, but also the speed, rhythm, pauses, and emotion of the speaker. You are not just repeating the words, you are imitating a voice. At the beginning, it feels difficult. You might feel slow or uncomfortable, but this discomfort is a sign that your brain is learning something new. Over time, your mouth begins to move more naturally, and your pronunciation starts to change without you forcing it. That sounds very different from what I usually do. I normally just repeat words or sentences without thinking about rhythm or emotion. Yes, and that is exactly why many students feel stuck. They are practicing pronunciation, but they are not practicing real speech patterns. English is not only about sounds, it is about how those sounds move together in time. Now, let me introduce another powerful practice that is not very common but extremely effective. It is called record and compare. Most students never listen to their own voice. They speak, but they don't analyze. I tell my students to do this. First, listen to a native speaker saying a sentence. Then, record yourself saying the same sentence. Then, compare both versions. When you do this, something very important happens. You start to notice small differences. Maybe your vowel is too short. Maybe your stress is the wrong place. Maybe your rhythm is too flat. This awareness is powerful because you cannot improve what you do not notice. And over time, this method trains your brain to self correct. Now, I want to talk about something that many students ignore, but it is extremely important: mouth positioning. Pronunciation is physical. Your lips, tongue, and jaw all play a role in how sounds are produced. But many students never think about this. They try to copy sounds, but their mouth is still using the patterns of their native language. For example, some English sounds require more movement in the mouth, some require more air, some require different tongue positions. If your mouth is not moving correctly, the sound will not be correct. So I often tell students to exaggerate movements at the beginning. Open your mouth more, move your lips more, feel the sound physically. This may feel strange at first, but it helps your brain create new muscle memory. And over time, those movements become natural. That is very interesting. I never thought about pronunciation as something physical like that. Yes, and this is why some students understand pronunciation but still cannot produce it correctly. Because understanding is mental, but speaking is physical. Now, let me share something that is very important and often misunderstood. Speed is not the goal. Many students think that speaking fast means speaking well, so they try to speak quickly. But when they do that, their pronunciation becomes unclear. Words lose their shape, sounds disappear. Instead, I teach students to focus on controlled clarity. Speak slowly but clearly. Give space to sounds. Respect the rhythm. When you build clarity first, speed will come naturally later. But if you start with the speed, you build bad habits. Now, I want to talk about another powerful idea. Pronunciation is connected to listening. identity. What do I mean by that? Your brain has a model of how English should sound, and that model is built from what you listen to every day. If you listen to clear, natural English regularly, your brain starts to absorb those patterns. But if your exposure is limited or inconsistent, your internal model remains weak. This is why I recommend something very specific. Choose one or two voices you like. Maybe a podcast speaker like this, maybe a YouTuber, maybe a teacher, and listen to them consistently. Not many voices, just a few. This helps your brain create a stable reference. Over time, your pronunciation starts to align with that reference. So instead of listening to many random sources, it's better to focus on a few consistent ones. Exactly. Consistency is more powerful than variety when it comes to pronunciation. Now, let's talk about something deeper. Many pronunciation problems are not technical, they are psychological. Some students hold tension in their voice, they speak too carefully, they are afraid of making mistakes, and this tension affects their pronunciation. Their voice becomes tight, their rhythm becomes unnatural, their speech loses flow. So, one important step is to relax the voice. Speak like you are talking to a friend, not like you are taking an exam. When your mind relaxes, your pronunciation improves. I had a student who had very good knowledge of English, but his pronunciation sounded very unnatural. Not because of his level, but because he was always nervous when speaking. One day, I asked him to speak while smiling. It sounds simple, but it changed everything. His voice became softer, his rhythm improved, his pronunciation became clearer because his emotional state changed. That is surprising, but it makes sense. When I feel nervous, I also feel like my voice is different. Exactly. Pronunciation is not only about language, it is also about how you feel when you speak. Now, I want to share one final idea that I believe is very important. You don't need to sound perfect, you need to sound alive. Many students try to control every sound, they want everything to be exact, but this often creates unnatural speech. Real communication is not perfect, it has variation, it has emotion, it has rhythm. So instead of trying to control everything, focus on expressing meaning. When you focus on meaning, your pronunciation becomes more natural because language is not only sound, it is expression. Let me leave you with this thought. Pronunciation is not something you fix in 1 week, it is something you develop over time. But the process does not need to be painful. It can be natural, it can be creative, it can even be enjoyable. Every time you listen carefully, every time you speak with intention, every time you become aware of your voice, you are improving. Slowly but surely. This conversation has completely changed how I see pronunciation. I thought I needed more rules, but now I understand that I need better awareness, better listening, and better practice, and maybe a little more confidence too. And to everyone listening, if you feel frustrated with your pronunciation, remember this: you are not bad at pronunciation. You were not just taught the right way, but now you have a new perspective. So start small, listen better, speak more, be patient, and trust the process. Because one day, without even noticing, you will sound different. And when that day comes, you will realize that pronunciation was never about perfection, it was about connection. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.